Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you again for joining us on this day three, final day of our business conference, Winning with Mojaloop. It's very great to see a number of you who have been consistent throughout the week, and for any new folks, you're very welcome. We have an exciting day today, but I want to begin with a couple of announcements. One of the things that we're happy to share with you today is we've just recently published the Mojaloop Executive Brief white paper. This is now available on mojaloop.io, and there's a link in the chat that would send you directly to that page. Please do feel free to read it, share it along with your colleagues and on your social networks. That would be greatly appreciated. Today's sessions, we begin this morning with Steve Haley and Nat Scheer talking about how global payment players get involved in Mojaloop with a specific perspective from Visa, which would be very exciting for most of us. And this, after the networking break, we'll close with two sessions, one on the benefits of competition from Greg and Ed Cable. That's from Cybrin and MyFos respectively. And then we'll go into the final session, which is a panel on helping a scheme get started with Mojaloop. That again will be led by Steve Haley from ModusBox, and he'll be joined by his colleague Drew Johnson, Ni from Fitzalworks, and Kadidia from Mojaloop. Today's networking sessions, the networking sessions feedback is incredible. Thank you so much for being willing and actively participating in them. We have three breakout rooms, again, as usual, divided along three topics. So the first topic is on community that I will lead, and we'll be focusing on how companies such as yours can get value from the open source community, the Mojaloop community. Leslie Ann will lead a discussion for product strategy and go-to-market on how do you think about cost modeling for IIPS and how does OSS affect that? And Paula will lead the track on open source software business and how can the Mojaloop ecosystem succeed. So we thank you so much for joining us today. I will quickly stop sharing my screen here, and I quickly want to welcome Steve Haley. Steve is the Economic Development Manager at ModusBox, and we also have with us this morning Nat Scheer. Nat is the head of real-time payments for Asia Pacific region at Visa. Steve, take it away.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Simeon. All right. So I am incredibly excited about today, not just because I get to talk to some more cool people in about 2 hours, but that I get to talk to Nat, and I get to talk to Nat in front of the entire community. And so today this is, I think we're calling this a fireside or a beachside chat, whatever we want to say. But there's a lot of topics that I'd love to chat with Nat about, and I'd love to hear his thoughts, and I'll go back and forth. We don't really have necessarily a presentation, but I think there are a couple topics that we want to be able to discuss. And and I think that the main point we want to get through this today, Nat, if you don't mind, is you and I have been on a journey together for a while now, and I think I'd like to be able to share what we've learned from each other over the past couple of years. So before I get started, though, I just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, Nat, and where you are, what you do.
Yeah, no, thanks, Steve. And I share the sentiment. It's nice to be able to kind of share our journey, and this is a great forum to do so. So thank you for the invitation. Physically, I'm in Singapore, where I look after real-time payments for Visa across the region. So geographically for Visa, that means everything between India down to New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. From a sort of product remit, that includes, my organization is part of our global money movement team. And in the region, I'm looking after a set of push payment products for Visa, as well as the associated value-added services. This also gives me remit to look after the strategy for taking those products to market, as well as partnerships, which is one of the reasons that we're here today.
Cool. Thanks. I think that's interesting. I think it's great to know that what you said about push payments, that you look after push payments. I think clearly we talk about real-time payments, but it's nice to always be distinguishing. We mean that in terms of push payments. And I think a lot of people also know that Visa already has a lot of push payment capabilities. And it's nice to see that those are building on what you already have. I think that's something we often forget about when we chat, or I often forget about. The other thing, before we dig into our journey as well, because we have so many people here from a lot of people who are working on projects in Africa and in other parts of the world, Asia, and particularly some of the markets that we work in, are potentially slightly different. Can you give us kind of a real-time payments overview of the region from your perspective?
Yeah, fantastic question, and glad to share. Yeah, I think for anyone who has lived, worked, or even backpacked across Asia, they're aware that it's a very large and diverse set of economies, and at very different stages of development when it comes to digital financial infrastructure. That being said, when you look across the markets here, most of them have already implemented a retail real-time payment system or in the process of doing so. Now, they range from sort of relatively basic systems to quite advanced ones, and some of the largest in the world, for sure. But they're still quite diverse in their functionality. I also see here in Asia that there's a very strong role for fintechs. So not just traditional financial institutions, but fintechs, mobile money operators, wallets, and they're playing the role of sort of providing access to financial services to a large section of the economy. I think in one statistic I saw was that in some of our markets, more than 60% of the consumers are actually accessing the financial services through sort of non-traditional means. And if I think about the trajectory that the region's on, there's been a sharp uptick driven a lot by COVID and the response to COVID and the desire to reduce cash over the last 2 years.
I have a couple of thoughts for you. So just to build on what you said of how prevalent it is across the region. I mean, Indonesia is building BI Fast. Philippines has InstaPay, which they've just upgraded. Malaysia has Do It Now. Singapore has Fast. I mean, we can go on and on. I think those are the big four. And then a number of other countries that we're all looking at are in the process, like you said. And then bounded on either side by India and China, which have two very different but very strong systems as well as we also have Japan, which is the oldest in the world. And so I think it's not something new, and that's interesting. One of the and also we also because everyone, those who know me, I'm based in Mumbai and I'm a big fan of UPI. So we also have this great example nearby of what it could look like. You said something interesting about wallets, and I think that's interesting because of the fact that a lot of people focus on Mojaloop from the interoperability of wallets perspective, not necessarily the interoperability of banks. We say all classes of financial institutions. How does Visa view these non-traditional? I mean, you guys clearly figured out how to work with banks. How does Visa view working with non-traditional financial institutions?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Well, we typically partner with financial institutions and they come in different flavors, right? So we have quite a few wallet partners already, and we have specific programs to help us engage with those sort of not our traditional banking members, but to extend partnership beyond that into wallets and others. I mean, in general, we see that that's where growth is going to come from in the future. So from a market sort of total market size perspective, we've penetrated the traditional financial institutions about as far as we're going to go. And from sort of a broader trend perspective, consumers like wallets. Consumers like to choose where and how they interact with their financial services. And Visa and other providers of digital financial services need to evolve and be able to meet the customer where they want to transact.
How do you? So I mean, awesome. I obviously everyone was very happy to hear Visa express that opinion, or you express that opinion. How do you see that working for some of Visa's more traditional, for very traditional card transactions? I mean, there's an idea out there that like we're building these Mojaloop systems, and they are new, and that's the way transactions are gonna go. There's a viewpoint out there that this is the one loop on which all things will transact. How do we? I'm not saying or you should agree with that. How do you think emerging real-time payments, whether wallets like you were just talking about, or interoperable systems like we're trying to build with Mojaloop, and traditional card payments, how do those two worlds meet? Or are they something that are just always going to sit in parallel, one and the other? Or is there a strategy for bringing those together, you think?
I guess the first sort of thought that comes to mind is that the card ecosystem is quite an well-developed one, and one that's been around for many decades. And over time, it's evolved quite a bit. Right. So from being a kind of very basic clearing and settlement system to now supporting quite elaborate and sometimes very niche use cases. And there are all kinds of niche players throughout the industry and along the value chain that support this, and they've developed over time, right? And they found their niche. So whether that's a particular hardware company or software company, or whether it's a service company that enables, mobile money operators to also transact with cards. There's sort of all these different little niches all over the industry and all over the ecosystem. And they're underpinned by, common standards and sort of the stability of this ecosystem that's developed. I don't think that's going to go away quickly. I think it took decades to develop, and everyone sort of has figured out a place to play. And obviously the industry is evolving, but I don't think it's going to go away quickly. So the sort of first and simple answer is I think these things will coexist. I also think there's a role for both to play side by side in an ecosystem. Something you've heard me talk about quite a lot, I think, is that Visa clearly needs to evolve as well in this space, and we're doing so. We're evolving to figure out how do we support our members who, are our key clients in this ecosystem, and they're playing roles as providing settlement services and liquidity, and we need to support them in their role as sponsoring some of these other entities. We also have a lot of value-added services on our network, which are valuable to provide security and enable transactions across the ecosystem. And we need to, and we are exposing those services so they can be consumed by the wider ecosystem and beyond just core Visa members. So if that's the mentality, if that's our position, then you can see that we're actually quite happy that the ecosystem is diversifying. They expands our customer base.
I mean, you got into where I was talking about, and without giving too much away, do you think you've covered in terms of as Visa's transitioning? I mean, everyone, like you said, there's this whole ecosystem that supports the card industry. Some of those will have a role in real-time payments and some will not, just by design. Is there anything else you can say about what you think the role Visa wants to play in the future of real-time payments?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's always a threat that if you don't evolve, that you're going to go extinct, right? And that applies to Visa. It applies across the ecosystem to these little niche players. But I think that the majority of them have been watching these trends. I mean, it's very market specific. Some markets are evolving much faster than others. But in the places where the markets are evolving quickly, I think most of the players that are providing, for example, merchant services or providing security or digital identity or whatever to the card ecosystem, they're now thinking about ways in which they can diversify. They think about oftentimes new emerging types of payments as an alternative payment method, right? So if you'll see that they now support many different types of alternative payment methods, which in their lingo is things other than cards, and real-time payments will be one of those, right? So I think that the more agile members of this ecosystem will evolve and will support both. And it's sort of in their industry interest to do so. Yeah, I mean, Visa specifically, as I mentioned, we want to be a service provider, and we have a strategy to do so. We're already evolving to do this. We've recognized that this is the way the industry is going, and our members, our member financial institutions, participate in multiple different networks today. The ways in which consumers pay and the type of products they use is increasingly diversified and goes well beyond using a card or a Visa product. And our role needs to evolve with that. And core to that strategy is thinking about how do we get involved in these new types of payment flows, flows that might start on Visa and then end up somewhere else, might start somewhere else and end up on Visa, or might be entirely off Visa's current infrastructure, right? I mean, we started as this proprietary network more than 60 years ago, and all our services were tightly bound to that network. And today we've unbundled many of them, and we sort of see ourselves as a service organization that can provide these services without the network or in addition to the network. We have more than 200 value-added services on our proprietary network, and we're choosing the ones that we think are most valuable to the industry and make sense to bring to support our members as they participate in all their activities, even beyond Visa, and we're exposing them.
I want to get into Mojaloop, but and where we can go and what some of the challenges we're going to have. But you just said something that triggered me that I want to know more about. That idea of unbundling these value-added services and having over 200 on your proprietary network and choosing which ones you want to unbundle and offer to your members. Are you able to talk about which ones those are that we might be able to get excited about seeing applied to networks that are built on Mojaloop?
Yeah, I think if you think about the role that we play in the industry today, you can probably quickly arrive at sort of some of the core ones. So, for example, fraud, right? It's well known that Visa has one of the most advanced fraud models in the industry. Pioneered artificial intelligence for fraud detection in the 1990s, and we pride ourselves on being the most secure network. From both a network security physical standpoint as well as fraud and our ability to detect fraud. And that's a logical place for us to play for another network. I mean, we can do that because we've made these investments over decades and because we operate at scale. And we can then bring that value to networks that haven't reached that scale. And I think it's a win-win.
Okay, let's talk about Mojaloop, but then I want to figure out how do we make sure that it's a win-win? Because the thing we all have to figure out is this whole ecosystem was built, and all of these service providers were built, and Visa wants to offer these value-added services to a network that's generating. You still have to generate enough money off of all these transactions to support people investing in offering these services. So let's get into that one a little bit later. The first thing I was going to say is, how did you, let's talk about Mojaloop. How did you first hear about Mojaloop?
Right. So in my days before Visa, I was doing research, probably 2015, 2016, something like that. I was doing research about regional payment networks. I was looking quite hard at SEPA, which had already launched and was evolving, and trying to understand sort of the ins and outs of SEPA and challenges and where it was going. And I looked for examples around the world and was looking also in Africa, looking at SADC and COMESA and other sort of regional integration projects. And somewhere along the way there, I ran into Level 1 as a project, started following it. And at some point thereafter, I heard about Mojaloop as sort of the brand, I guess, of the tech platform behind it.
Have you so that was a year or so before, maybe 2 years before you and I started talking. And how do you think your initial impressions of what it was and what it was trying to do have changed over the past, let's say, 2 years of digging deep into it and hearing my constant spiels every week?
Yeah, I mean, things become real when you roll up your sleeves and you really get into it. And you can read a lot, but it's different when you start to you try to start to engage with the technology more directly. I think there's a bit of fear of the unknown, and I think this is also touches by the nature of the Mojaloop being an open source project as well. I think there was some hesitancy perhaps that I had. I was very deeply curious though, and I wanted to get into it. And the more that I've rolled up my sleeves, the more that I've kind of gotten into it, the more I can I can find ways in which I think this could really add value to the ecosystem. I think there's some real logic behind it as well. It's sort of like API first kind of mentality. Cloud native is, I think maybe Mojaloop was a little bit before its time in some ways. I don't know, maybe I was a little behind the times, but I think I've become more comfortable with it the more that I've gotten close to it.
I think we all go on a journey of how much comfort we have, how deep we dig into it, and then maybe our comfort goes down, and then we get more comfortable. So it's a journey. Don't get discouraged if that journey isn't always linear. What do you think we could do to make it so that, because I would completely agree. It's one of those things that when you first look at it, it's a little bit overwhelming to really understand what it's about. What do you think we can do to make sure that more people like you have spend enough time looking at some of those nuances to understand the value of it?
Well, I think there has to be a business problem that you're trying to solve, right? I mean, it can't be just academic curiosity if you're at a commercial organization like I am. But many organizations like Visa have some sort of innovation program, or the company has the ability to engage in something like a POC. And I think that's good. It creates kind of a framework. Certainly, our innovation program created a framework that was a safe place, a sandbox to try things out, and also sort of defined program of support around that. So if someone's organization has something like that, I would suggest this is a good way to get close in a way that is also defined and limited and would not would be permissible by all stakeholders. It also is a place where you can try to have some quick wins, right? So you can try to use that program to to prove out something in a POC, or to answer some key business question that you're trying to answer, and then hopefully build off of that, right? So that's sort of what worked for me, and I think would be a suggestion to others. I mean, if I go back to you sort of were alluding at what else could the organization do to help us. I mean, one question that has come up in the past was around the long-term viability of something like Mojaloop, especially, it hasn't been around for that long, so it's a bit novel in some ways, but also there's some core novel ideas about open source, public digital infrastructure, financial infrastructure. And just as I got more comfortable over time with it, I think others could benefit from doing such a program, such a POC or taking up a project within an innovation center. But also, understanding how this is going to be supported going forward, I think, is also key. There's a lot of enterprises will be trying to make a decision that they do have a business need that they want to fulfill, and they come to that fork where they say, do I go down open source or not? And it's probably more fundamental than about financial infrastructure, but I think there's an extra highlight about it because of the sensitivity and the need for resilience and robust infrastructure for financial services. So I'd be curious to hear from you, to flip the chairs a little bit. Alleviate my concerns or others' concerns. I mean, what is the support model for the Mojaloop going forward? I mean, how what does the community look like today? How's it evolved? And do we have a future? If I build something using the Mojaloop, I want to know that it's going to be around and supported by the community for, I don't know, let's say the next 10 years.
I mean, the biggest thing I would say is the biggest exciting thing that we have around the community is that Visa is now joining the community, and we're expecting that they're going to provide a lot of support to the community going forward. I'm just joking. I would say, from my perspective, because I haven't been around as long as a lot of other people, but I remember, I think it was my first day at ModusBox was actually at the first thing that was being called, one of the first things was being called a convening, where we talked about the technology. It was a very small group of people from primarily 2 or 3 organizations. And we've now seen that get much, much bigger. And so one thing is that just in general, there are a lot more institutions who are. So I will get to your answer, I promise. I'm not completely sidestepping, but I just want to give a quick pitch of how far we've come. There's a lot more organizations that are joining and have joined. We're getting a lot more and bigger organizations, and I think what we need to do is we need to see more people, more organizations like Visa, like Google, who see the value in it and are willing to come on board on this journey. And I think one of the biggest ways we've been able to do that is through a lot of these POCs, like you were talking about, whether the POCs like we're working on in Myanmar, which is now moving forward, or the things that you and I did together in the accelerator program that we did in the Philippines, which is now hopefully growing as well. I think we're seeing a lot more of those. Long term, I think what it will take, well, one of the other complaints that we had a couple of years ago was that there wasn't enough technology companies actually providing the enterprise support. And I think we're seeing more companies starting to move into that space. And that's giving me a lot of hope as well. I think I'm going to be having a panel later on with both FitzWorks and Mowali. And I think those of us who've worked with them can see that they are taking a lot more of the onus of the ongoing maintenance and upgrades of the systems. And that's giving me hope as well. I think that and just from those 2, I mean, 2 implementations are not going to support the code itself, but 2 is a good place to start. And after that, we will get more and more and more. So I think seeing how much those implementers are supporting the code is helping me feel like once we get enough of them, we are going to see that sustainable, that sustained software, or that sustained maintenance of the open source. But I do think it's going to take one really big one to adopt. That's going to be a big driver. I see that Paula wants to jump in. Paula, are you able to unmute and come in and talk about this?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in briefly. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Hi, Paula.
Yeah. Hi, Nat. Yeah. So right now I'm just in the process this week of doing a grant report. So that a lot of these numbers and stats are important as far as community growth. And some of the things, one of the things I just shared in the chat is, what are some of the metrics we see that show the community is growing and engaging? And one key metric is training. We just launched a training program in January, and we have 550 individual users that have enrolled in the training program. And we have, I think, about 8 courses live right now. But it's an investment of time for someone to take on that training. So, that's a good indicator that people want to learn more, want to establish skills, and want to contribute to the community, to the deployments, and as deployers themselves, learn more about the platform. Secondly, what we see is just the overall community engagement and stats. When we literally a year ago, last month, I would say a year ago in July, we had 522 active members of our community across all different walks of life, developers, business people, et cetera. We're now up to over 1,300. So these are people they're actively participating in our convenings, that are attending our webinars, that are taking training courses, et cetera. We're seeing a new interest in membership at both levels. We, obviously added the Monetary Authority of Singapore earlier this year, which is really an important endorsement of our technology. They obviously are a very innovative regulator, and I think it's set a very important note to the industry at large. And we're going to be launching new programs with them in the upcoming months. So there's a lot of factors underneath it all that talk to vibrancy and engagement and ongoing work. We just launched a business directory today because people are asking us, well, who's qualified, who's skilled to help me configure and deploy Mojaloop? And so we're starting to see just every few hours, I'm seeing a new entry in that business directory. And those are people that are saying to the marketplace, we have the skills to help you on the early side of the design and deployment of your solution, or on the back end in the operation of Mojaloop. So yes, you're right, Nat. We're young, relatively speaking, but I think all the indicators show commitment, investment of people's time and energy, and developers in particular, their time is extremely valuable, and so that's what our team is doing. Simeon trying to continue to grow the community, make sure that they're onboarded effectively, and Leslie Ann making sure that we're engaging the marketplace to ensure that they're providing requirements and feedback on the product roadmap. So anyway, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, well, fantastic. No, thank you for all the stats. It's all very encouraging. And I, for one, think it's a great project, and I'm glad to see that level of engagement. And I'll check out the business directory for sure as well after the session. I saw there was another question as well, Steve.
I saw Elizabeth ask a question, but I want to we gave kind of our pitch deck of why people like me and Paul are very bullish on the fact that we are moving definitely in the right direction very quickly. But the question is, cool, but yeah, how? And to me, I think it goes back to what I said before: is the card industry has had 50 plus years to develop enough transactions, a cost of transactions, so that there's enough money being made to build an ecosystem. And I don't think we will be able to answer that doubt for you, Nat, until there are enough networks that have been built on Mojaloop that are generating enough transactions to generate enough revenue to support the ecosystem that has to be built around them. So right now we are still building, but I don't think we're going to hit that point until any of these networks that are using Mojaloop are actually doing enough transactions and have found their business model that makes that network strong enough to, I mean, yes, great that Visa wants to offer fraud. Until any of these networks using Mojaloop are running enough transactions and making enough money to afford your fraud services, we're probably not going to be there. And so a little pitch for what ModusBox has done is when people ask me, okay, you're director of economic development, what does that mean? And I try to explain it of our job is in economic development is to help networks become successful, and not just with the technology, but with all the stakeholders around it, because no one wants the technology that is working just great for the network that can't support its own weight. And so the hard question for all of us is we have to be supporting hubs that are making enough money to be able to pay service providers like Visa to make them more robust systems. So that is my answer of no, we're not there yet. What we need is more transactions. And transactions generating revenue for hubs. We won't get there until we have that. Let's go. Good.
Yeah, no, I think that's a a core point and theme throughout all of this is sustainability, right? Sustainability of the community, sustainability of the necessary investment. And one of we have a question from the audience around free services. It's free to the end user, which I think is in many cases great. And I share the goals about financial inclusion, but the system isn't free. And to your point, Steve, someone needs to be investing, and if that's considered a digital public good, and you want to raise taxes to pay for it, then fine. That's fine. The competition will move off of those utility rails and into the services space, and the industry will have to evolve around that. But I think it's often a misconception. I'm certainly not to this community of experts, but in the broader sort of general populace, there's this misconception that if it's free to the consumer, that that the system itself is free. And if there, I think also to your point, Steve, Visa was able to build this very rich network that we have, not the whole ecosystem, but the part that we control, because of the revenue model that we have and reinvestment. And you may argue that this is not the best revenue model, or it is. It's certainly been successful, and it's been successful to also sustain for 6 decades continued reinvestment in innovation. And if you look at some of the public networks or the free networks, they're struggling to find revenue to make those kind of investments. And you're right, it's a shame if Mojaloop doesn't, or a Mojaloop instance or operator doesn't have the revenue to afford a world-class fraud solution, but it's also a little bit short-sighted perhaps, right? So if you want to drive adoption, you need to have confidence in the system. And if there is fraud, then you need to drive that out to it's a chicken and an egg. You need to drive it out so that you can drive adoption and gain volumes and generate revenue and invest in innovation.
It's a little bit of a prompt. We're going to be talking about chicken and eggs in the talk we're doing in a little bit, because our experience is that building these networks is just a series of chickens and eggs. I want to get to Elizabeth's question. From your point of view, what business use cases might Mojaloop assist a global network with? Are you willing to chat about that?
Yeah, sure. So two pop into mind. Thanks, Elizabeth, for the question. One is around interoperability. So we currently the cards ecosystem. I should say traditionally, the cards ecosystem is underpinned by certain ISO standards, and those standards both create the ability for interoperability within our ecosystem, but increasingly there are other standards in the world. And one way to solve that is through conversion. and Visa does offer APIs, but we can't solve for everything. And one of the advantages of the Mojaloop is the ability to create interoperability, to translate between different closed loop networks. And Visa sees that as sort of an aggregation model in a way. So we can plug into a Mojaloop, and if that Mojaloop is supporting interoperability between other closed loop networks, we have the one-to-many kind of relationship that allows us to extend our reach. So that's one clear value proposition for a major network to work with a platform like Mojaloop. The other is that currently there's not that many options for cross-border payments and cross-currency payments. And I don't know, I can't speak to the other networks here, but Visa has a very large cross-border network in place and quite a lot of services that underpin that. And we can support communication between Visa and Visa's money movement networks and cross-border, cross-currency into or out of a Mojaloop. We could also theoretically underpin communication between two Mojaloops with the currency conversion and the liquidity as sort of a service to the Mojaloops. And I think this is very consistent with the role that Visa would like to see itself fulfill in the future. And to do this, we'll need partners with technology providers and operators in the space. So that's another clear value proposition, is that Mojaloop is one of a kind. It's one of a category of technology platforms, and where the network is connected to participants that would like to transact cross-border, we can underpin that and work in partnership.
One of the things that I often find myself saying when I pitch Mojaloop, so be curious to hear if this actually resonates with you or not, but is for those of you who want to play in that role, like I said, Visa is this idea of you can connect to something in that role of connecting to real-time payment networks of any ilk. We often say, yeah, but wouldn't that be easier if they were all Mojaloops? And therefore that's the benefit of having this be open source. That way, Visa can play that role in a much easier way without having to negotiate and deal with all kinds of different standards and all kinds of different transaction patterns all over the world. You can deal with a standard. Are we off base? Is that really something that Visa would look at and say, oh yeah, that actually would be nice? Or do you think, yeah, it's really not that hard. If everybody's using ISO 20022, we're good.
Well, I understand the ambition to make the world after your own image, but that's a long journey to go on. There might be a time in the future where you have many Mojaloop instances, and sure, I think having some standardization, underpins interoperability. I mean, look at Visa, 15,000 plus financial institutions all using the same scheme, and 160 different currencies in 200 plus countries. That's only possible because we're all talking the same language and have agreed to the same sets of rules. It took a long time to get there. I think there's a lot of time between now and the future of Mojaloops connected up around the world, talking to one another at scale, where just the de facto situation we'll need to figure out how to translate between them. It's also kind of from my understanding, the genesis of the Mojaloop platform and the idea was a recognition that you needed to create interoperability. And so I think it fits that role. Does that also create an opportunity for Visa? The fact that there's a diffuse world of different types of technologies and standards. Sure, but we also need partners to make it work. And as you know, that's one of the key areas in which we've been in discussion with over the last months.
Yep. Completely agree. That's why we're trying to build them. Okay, and then just because we did have this other question from Douglas here, do you feel like we talked about that one with specifically with BIM and 3PPI?
I mean, there's the question about the innovation side of it, and the needing for investment to sustain innovation. I think, yeah, I mean, I think we covered that off. I mean, the other side is, yeah, I mean, we've also discussed earlier today that it's sort of you need to continue to innovate as the ecosystem evolves. So if you only have one standard and one network that you support, that of course is a risk. And for any service providers listening in, newsflash, it's probably a good idea to start thinking about supporting other standards and other rails. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's not one answer. Do I think they're going to become superfluous? No, I mean, I think that you'll need service providers, and there'll continue to be niches that will just evolve in the, for example, real-time payment space. The fact that the card networks today support things for very, very specific use cases. Like if you want to go, tank up your petrol, we can put a hold on we recognize that it's a filling station, and we can put a hold for a certain amount to cover the risk of somebody driving away, and then complete the payment when, a few minutes later when he hits when the tank is full and, you want to settle your bill. That's a use case that didn't exist, of course, in the beginning for the card networks, and something that was, evolved over time and supported by various different partners. The real-time payment space will need those kind of innovations, and there will be lots of room for solution providers to move in and cover all kinds of little niches.
We hope so. I guess we just need to make sure we have enough hubs making enough money to support all of those services, like we said. To close out, there was something you hinted at that I think what I wanted to talk about was the journey that we've been on. And I think you talked about the innovation, having innovation hubs or innovation centers or teams within big corporations. And so the question is, how do we get more global payment players and or global partners and corporates like Visa engaged in Mojaloop? And I think that the way that we've done it, I think, is the only way we can do it. And so do you mind if I talk a little bit more about the stuff we've been doing over the past couple of months?
As long as you make it sound really good and exciting.
It is good and exciting. So first, for those of you who don't know, ModusBox, so yeah, I guess the first thing is that we started talking even before this about how Visa and Mojaloop and ModusBox could potentially partner in a number of ways, and having open and frank conversations and building a relationship around that allowed us to have open and frank conversations about what is our business model, what is your business model, what are your personal constraints within your organization, what are my personal constraints within my organization. I don't think if we'd had the time and space to do that and put our brains together about how do we overcome those organizational constraints, I don't think we would have made it this far. And that was a year almost that we were talking about and just coming up with those before we got to I think the breaking point, which is what you alluded to, which is when ModusBox got accepted into the Visa Asia Pacific Accelerator Program. And that was the thing that really did break this open and allow us to leverage our resources in our organizations to make that happen. So for anybody, this is my little pitch to anybody who's ever looking at these corporate accelerator programs, the one we did with Visa was absolutely amazing. And so anyone who has a chance to apply to it, please do. But also look at some of the other ones that are out there. I'm sure other organizations, other corporates and payment companies have similar accelerator or innovation platforms that you can apply to. It really gave us access to so many other people within Visa to be able to actually start, like you said, Nat, just roll up our sleeves and start building stuff and testing stuff and having more of those nuanced conversations. And whereas you and I had spent a year having those, the fact that we now have within Visa, I would say 10 to 20 people, but at least a good solid cadre of 10 who believe in what we're doing and have an interest in doing what we're doing. And that has been incredibly helpful to start solving those problems. And we would never have had that if we didn't have the chance to actually work with them day in and day out for 4 months to see that happen. So that was one thing that I think was a huge lesson, was that accelerator program that ModusBox went through with you guys was the thing that changed the game for us. The next one is small proofs of concept. And just can't overemphasize the importance of making sure we can show something concrete to people. Making sure and you're very good at this, Nat, of making sure that we set expectations correct, because there's a long way from showing something cool and showing something live. And I think between you and Warren, you often make sure that I use the right language for that. But being able to show something live like we did with the Philippines was very, very interesting, and allowed us to generate enough excitement to leverage more resources. And I would just say that your executives in AP have been, I mean, we're always supportive and interested, but I think that was the moment where I saw it switch to, oh, this is something we could actually really do. And so I would say, yeah, those are the two things. And you already brought them up, but I wanted to kind of give the context of, yeah, we actually did them. And I think we're seeing the possibilities that come from that because of that.
Yeah.
So anything I missed of that?
Well, I think no. I think you covered it off. But I would like to reinforce that. Yeah, finding a champion is really important, and it goes both ways, right? So you need a champion in both organizations, and then that champion has to build some support. A vehicle for that would be something like doing a POC, or finding some sort of existing framework like an accelerator program, and you have to manage your stakeholders very well. And in our case, I think it was. We used the accelerator program as that vehicle, and that then became the platform and the venue to showcase what we could do. And I think what you and I had believed in early on became then apparent to others, but we wouldn't have had the opportunity in the venue to showcase that without the right kind of framework. And that's how it worked in our organizations. I think it's probably a recipe that could be repeated for sure, but I'm sure it's not the only way.
Yep. I think we've got a few minutes left. But I think, is there any other questions from the audience that people would like to ask Nat about? And now that we've talked a little bit about our journey together, I'll open it up. And there was the question about Mojaloop hubs will operate on a cost recovery basis, which I think Leslie Ann answered. And I think that's the thing that I think we actually talked quite a bit about that earlier on, which was that it's actually up to the hub. You can run a hub based on whatever revenue model you would like to. Mojaloop is agnostic to that. And I think that was, if I remember right, a year and a half ago or so, that was probably one of the misconceptions we had to work through of that. No, that there's not a hard, fast rule that has to be the case. The business model is up to the hub operator. Okay.
There's been quite a few questions, if I may. There's been quite a few questions related to revenue models and investment and sustainability and fees and so forth. And I wouldn't profess that there's complete alignment around all this between ModusBox and Mojaloop and Visa, but actually when I think about some of the bigger picture kind of goals, right? We might be motivated to achieve those goals by different things, but Visa ultimately cares about, I think, many of the same things that the Mojaloop Foundation cares about around financial inclusion and displacing cash, providing access to these digital services to more people to improve their lives, right? I mean, all of that is aligned. And we might be motivated by profit as well, in a way that might be slightly different than the Mojaloop Foundation's motivation. But if we're cooperating and driving toward the same goals, then I think that we should allow ourselves that, and we should try to work toward that future together.
Obviously, I completely agree. I think that's probably the right tone to end it on. I think what I've been excited about over the past couple of months more and more is I really think we are getting closer to understanding, more people seeing that alignment within Visa that we work with and understanding that alignment, but then also more people starting to believe that, okay, we might not have all of the revenue questions answered yet, but I feel like we're getting closer. And I feel like even though because it is a new direction, we're not going to have all of the answers, but I feel like we're getting closer in a way that more people are starting to find it credible. And that's been exciting. So I appreciate the patience. In case it wasn't clear when Nat said you need a champion, you absolutely do. Nat, there's no way we would have made it through this and we would have gotten this far if it hadn't been for you. That is the big luck for both ModusBox and the entire Mojaloop community, that we were able to find you, and we were able to find somebody who could see the vision at such an early stage. So thank you for being our champion. And thanks in advance for continuing to be our champion. And I hope that everyone in the community gets a chance to work with you. So
my pleasure.